He has authored some of the key publications on game localization. Also, he supports research from all countries, for he believes that we must improve intercultural communication in our hyper-connected, globalized world. So, Dr. Branrino, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Excellent.
Well.
Okay, so let me share my screen. And then we go into this. I wasn't too sure of how much information or how little information to pack into this. So I think I just did too much, but that's probably better. Then I'll go very quick, and then you can ask me to repeat anything you want me to repeat. So I entitled this Integration of Co-Creation in Game Localization Workflows, in the knowledge that still in many countries and universities and actually industries, industry practice, translation is still approached as a very artistic endeavor. And there is an element of that when you have such a big product as you do with multimedia interactive entertainment software, video games, things get very complicated very quickly just because of the workflow itself. So I would say that even those of you who do not play video games would probably would know a few video games that have been quite successful. And the fact is that most AAA video games, AAA being the top of the range, the best of the best, AAA video games nowadays are enjoyed around the world thanks to complex workflows full of talented professionals that make simultaneous shipment into 14+ languages possible. This is the release of the same game in 14 languages at the same time around the world. So players can delight in the preference means multimedia interactive entertainment software. I could give you some examples so that we kind of go with something. I'll just play a few seconds. Now, what you can see in video games is that it's an audiovisual product, but it is a multimedia product. Right? So you have menus, you have pop-up screen, you have subtitles, you have voiceover. You have other games just such as this. They have a complex user interface. This is Persona 5. It's originally Japanese, although you never know by seeing it. You probably recognize this. This is The Witcher, which of course is a Polish game. And this was the Priscilla song, Wolf and Storm, that was translated into several languages and sung accordingly. So the French version is the original release French version. And then you have quirky stuff. Which is the typical language of Jar Jar Binks in this Lego version of Star Wars. Whether you love or you hate video games is irrelevant from at this point. Is the artistry and the craftsmanship that takes for translators and graphic designer and everybody that is involved in the development of video games to make this happen. Now, all game development processes would normally be like this. There's a design document, a prototype, a pre-alpha, full alpha version. This is the actual development of a video game program, right? A video game is just a program. It's a computer program. It's nothing more than that. And for many, many years, actually for almost 40 years, it's been like this. But then they started realizing that in order to make the most of it, they had to sell in different countries. And in order to sell in different countries, they had to integrate localization. And localization, they had to come up with a new idea of translation, which is why we use localization. And we can talk about the terminology if you want. But localization is something slightly different from translation. Translation would normally apply to the translation of this book into this book. And that works fine. But the more you industrialize, the more you specialize, the more complicated it gets. So with the localization step, it becomes a bit more easy for all the other language versions to be created and translated and released at the same time as the original. So the localization of multimedia interactive entertainment software cannot be tackled like any other product that came before. There was a lot of trial and error, and mostly because developers and publishers, or video game developers and video game publishers, being computer scientists, didn't really understand translation or localization themselves, even though they had gone through this in the localization of software, meaning websites and all the programs that were already available. So obviously you can understand why the problems were the way they were, because initially video games had no text. It was just a bit of a visual gimmick with a bit of sound, and you move something around the screen and there wasn't much need for a text. So basically it was very small companies doing all the job, and that's it. It will literally be 1 or 2 people. To this era belong these games that you can still play in some arcades, and actually you can play them in your mobile phone. Now, you probably remember Pac-Man. I don't know if you know this little cute fact about Pac-Man, that originally Japanese, it was called Pac-Man. But someone thought this naming was a bit, it lent itself to confusion with the swear word in English, and then they redesigned it. And they started thinking, well, we can call it by the Japanese names, but how about we call it by something that will be more appealing to an American audience, an American player? Well, and doesn't that sound obvious? But it wasn't obvious at the time. And this was the first time, perhaps, that was done, and it was done quite successfully. So the Japanese names and nicknames were created, transcreated, or translated, whichever you prefer, into the English version. Then you have all the Mario series in the 80s, and you have these small developers partner with publishers. And this is where I started to see whether the workflow works for co-creation or not. At this point, it was still, the focus was always, we're going to develop a game, we're going to program this game, we're going to get the graphics, we're going to get the artists, we're going to get the storytelling, we're going to release the game, and we make any money, we localize it. Yeah. So obviously, that didn't allow for a lot of creativity at that point. And it was already late because it was localization post-release. Now in the 90s, they started to integrate localization before, at least for some languages. This is just an example of the same map in 2 languages. So this is English and this is Spanish, and this is Baldur's Gate. It doesn't matter. What's interesting is that it was already, the creativity of it was already part of the development. In a very shy way, but it was already there. So now we have that the industry itself, all of the industry had grown enough that there could be companies that could just be developers, companies that could just be publishers, and companies that could just be localizers. This is a big step, or it was a big step at the time, and it allows for the specialization of everything. This is what we get with industrialization. We specialize, everybody specializes. It means that they created what is called the localization kit, which is everything that is necessary to completely understand and translate that particular game product. And as you can see, there's loads and loads. Because a game is a program, like I said, being an interactive experience, all those little things that are there can only be elicited by pressing a particular combination of keys, etc. So the localization kit was fundamental, and this continues to be the case. Now, regarding the workflow, the strategy changed a little bit. So now the localization is done before release, but still done late. And this would also mean that the chances of collaboration were very reduced. Because by the time the game was finished, this team of people are already working in a different game. So the localization team cannot interact with the creators because they already moved on. They're working on a different project, so they can just do the level best, and that sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't work. Now in the 2000s, we come to the establishment of the video game localization industry, and we have new tools and new processes. So now all the game localization industry starts creating tools specific for them, not like the other tools that were in use in other translation areas, because the language services industry is enormous. So they started creating tools for themselves for game localization. And this is a bug reporting tool, very common in software testing, where different people, part of the localization team or the QA team, QA quality assurance, proofreading, checking, play testing, can or have to feed in every single bug or error and then correct. We have different steps in reporting the bug. So every little thing that's wrong, whether it is the terminology, whether it is a comma, whether it is a capital letter, whether it is whatever. So all the bugs are reported, regressed, and confirmed as corrected. Also, we have during this time the creation of the different rating agencies. Now, rating agencies, you may think, well, so why do I care about rating agencies if I'm translating? Well, it is a determining factor for game developers and publishers that if in a particular locale, country and language, in a particular locale, a particular game is deemed inappropriate for people, for children or players age 12 or players age 15, depending on the locale, it will not be released, or it will be released with a different recommendation. So everything will need to be changed. And if that means changing the language or changing the graphics or changing the sound or the music or even the special effects, that will be part of the localization process. So it could be that it will affect your translation if you're working on translation. Now, that comes, and it may surprise many people, that it is sometimes the case that the same game is released in different countries with different age recommendations. You only get to find out, obviously, if you take the trouble to go and compare. But yeah, this is exactly the same game, and I know the localization manager of this project, and it had 6 different age recommendations, which is quite bizarre if you don't think of somebody else's point of view. This is very common, actually. Then what happened also during this period is that there was, because the internet was more popular, more utilized by more people, it was more common for players to engage with developers and publishers to say what they thought about the game or what they wanted more of or less of. This is just a very cute example, I thought, because Club Penguin was a video game developed for young players. I think it was 11, 12, mostly 13-year-old players. And in this case, they were saying, yeah, we want a Brazilian server on Club Penguin. And this is basically a bunch of Brazilian kids playing in the game, making the Brazilian flag to ask for it. And they succeeded. A few months later, the company, seeing that they had a growing engagement from that country, they released a Brazilian Portuguese version of it, which nowadays is actually very common. So listening to the communities became part of localization as well. So single language vendors and multiple language vendors now kind of specialize, and now you probably know as well as I do, they have the ones that started many years ago have integrated others that are smaller and that are starting now, but this is common practice. Now, what's interesting is that the localization strategy changes, and it has integrated now LocQA. LocQA, for those of you who are not involved with software or video games, is localization quality assurance, localization play testing, so to speak. So someone, or actually a team of people, needs to play the game beginning to end several times to make sure that everything appears when it has to appear, all the subtitles, all the menus, all the pop-up messages, all the voiceover recording, all the animation, everything is there in the right place. So LockQA, which was new, it wasn't really a separate stage, is part of the chain of activities, or the waterfall chain of activities that are done before release. But this is still is not what they were aiming for, because the more and more we move into the 2010, the decade just gone, we go into what you could better say as called enhanced localization. And enhanced localization, what it does is it really puts the emphasis on the locale. So whatever we make the game is almost irrelevant. It could be made in China, in Japan, or in France, or in Poland, or in America. It doesn't matter. Is once we know we have a product that is popular, now we're going to tweak it enough, just enough, to make it pleasant for each of the people in each locale. So they would do seasonal releases depending on the festivities and the cultural events on each locale. Here we see an integration of the development of the game with the development or the production of the localization. It wasn't this serious until this late, which you would have thought they were doing this before, but actually they did it. So the industry, this industry development allows for co-creation, and it allows for co-creation. And actually, we get a flourish of new professions. So within most AAA games, most AAA teams, we have all these people. Obviously, there are many more, but these are the ones that are involved with localization. So you have in managing localization managers, obviously, you have localization engineers, so coders that know about localization. You have translation reviewers, but you have creative editors. And the creative editors would typically work very much with the brand officers, copywriters, and trans creators, because they want to maintain whatever is essential to the brand, something that Disney had been doing forever. Now video games are doing it. You have access curators and officers. So is this accessible for deaf players? Is this accessible for colorblind people? You had head of linguistic testers and linguistic testers, which is a very common low entry job for students. Localization consultants, typically on cultural issues and geopolitics. You have dubbing directors, audio engineers, and dubbing actors. You have community engagement officers, being translators or linguists, because they need to engage in different languages. We have data analytic experts. So what's happened there is that all these schemes that we saw before, where they were initially only focused on, let's design a game, let's make a game, let's have pretty graphics and good sound, now integrates, let's have localization, let's have accessibility, and let's have the localization QA as part of the development of this product. Because this, although it is very difficult to manage, and it is the best guarantee to expand. So you have internationalized your game design, and now you can localize into any languages you want. And you have internationalized, and you have given accessibility to your game design, and now you can provide different levels of accessibility. And there are some incredible examples out there, like The Last of Us 2 probably will be one of the best. That means that the video game can be released in minimum 14 to, if it is a top title, maybe 25 different games, different locales. 25 different locales on release day is an incredible endeavor. But that is done regularly as a matter of regular practice. So such integration enables co-creation, and we have the pre-production, production, and post-production elements that never used to include localization or accessibility issues, features, but now they do. Now we have log-friendly code and access-friendly code. Now we have translation and proofing and access production and accessibility checks, localization, asset integration, etc. So now it is weaved into it. Why? Because from a minimum of 50 to up to 95% of revenues that any game generates, those revenues come from localized products. So it is thanks to the localization that a video game can make hundreds of millions of dollars. This is a very long story made into a very short one. I don't know if you want to make some question now or you want to leave it for later.
Thank you, Dr. Bernard-Marino, for making us familiar with the, as it turns out, quite a long history of localization. When I speak to the microphone, I got some wind, and I cannot prevent it from happening. Anyway, has anyone from the audience any questions to our speaker? Okay, so I've just got a proposal to make a Q&A round at the end of the talk. So if you could stay with us or join us in I will have to make space for the next speaker, and then we will we'll come back to you at in an hour.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so please stay connected, and I will just let the next speaker in.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Dragos Ciobanu, can you hear me? Oh.
Hello, perfectly.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome to the TEW conference workshop, and I will introduce you briefly. Dr. Dragos Ciobanu will talk about, will deliver the main lecture titled "Is your computer talking to you during translation, revision, or post-editing? Keep calm, talk back, and carry on." And now a short biographical note. Dragos Ciobanu is professor of computational terminology and machine translation at the University of Vienna Center for Translation Studies. He leads the HAI Trans Research Group, which stands for Human and Artificial Intelligence in Translation, and investigates ways to improve localization workflows by integrating translation and speech technologies, as well as methods to optimize collaborative translation and training practices. He collaborates with language service providers from around the world and trains linguists from international organizations to maximize the use of language and project management technologies. So, Dr. Ciobanu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Many thanks for the invitation. It's very kind. Let me share my screen with sound. So hopefully, because at some point there will be some sound coming through, or there should be some sound coming through. Let's see. So first of all, can I just double check that my sound is okay? And I know it's two years into the pandemic, and this is still the most widely used phrase, I guess. Can you hear me?
I suppose the audience
Brilliant. Okay. As the Austrians say, los geht's. Thank you again very much for this kind invitation. As was very generously presented, our group looks at ways in which we can use both human and artificial intelligence in order to make the life of translators more ergonomic, to help them achieve better quality in their work. So what's coming is basically our investigations into the use of speech technologies in order to help with this purpose. So there will be a what, a why, and a how. Because time is short, probably I'll do the how before the why. So in the worst case scenario, you'll have to trust me that there is a good reason for playing with speech technologies. But in an ideal case, I'll also show you some data we have to motivate it. But first of all, what am I talking about? So there are two major, or at least the ones we look at are two major groups of speech technologies. First of all, text-to-speech. So that's when a computer program reads out text in digital format. So that would be your, I don't know, assistive technologies, for instance, reading out a Word document, or as we will see, Microsoft Word reading out a Word document. So text-to-speech, TTS, that's going to feature today. And also there is another category. In a way, this is a lot more talked about, ASR, automatic speech recognition. And that means a different computer program that interprets the sound coming through. So it's been called dictation. Software, people have different names for it, speech to text. But essentially, we have people who speak freely, and computer software write down whatever they recognize. So these are the two main categories of software. And for some language pairs, they have been available to translators, to revisers, to post editors for a fairly long amount of time. But their uptake among these professionals is still, let's say, work in progress. So on the one hand, we have, this is just a brief screenshot from the TAUS technology landscape, which is fairly frequently revised, but not massively changed. And we see an evolution of translation technologies, an evolution of types of content, of languages in which this content is available. So, you know, it's a very exciting picture. We should be living in the age of convergence, and very soon we'll get to singularity. But if we look at translation professionals, so translators, revisers, post editors, their software hasn't really, in fairness, changed that much over the last years. We still have source text segmented according to the segmentation rules, but generally in very short sentences. We have translations being inserted in a column next to the source. We have suggestions from translation memories, suggestions from turn bases, and some quality assurance features, and that's pretty much it. So the preferred, or not necessarily preferred, but the environment that was or has been offered to professional translators tends to be very static, also very silent. And we were curious to see in our group whether, if we spice it up a little bit, if something happens. A little bit of an intermezzo, if there are any members of the audience who are still not very sure about what CAT tools do, or how they can be used, what's their purpose, just to put on your radars a project that finished not very long time ago, called DigiLing, whose one of the project's aims was to produce free learning resources on the topic of digital technologies. And there is a 10-module course, 10-week course, or you can do it in 10 hours if you want, on the topic of localization tools and workflows. So that's just in case someone is wondering about CAT tools. But let's get back to today's presentation, and especially to how can we make more of current technologies, of available technologies, in order to produce better work and also have a more ergonomic environment as well. There has been a move very slowly from the part of translators to adopt dictation as part of the workflow. And then a few years back, even some of the CAT tools providers have, like MemoQ in this case, have acknowledged it and have started integrating apps or plugins in order to enable translators to do that within those particular CAT tools. So it's a really welcome move. And on the other hand, if we talk about text-to-speech, so the computer reading out the translation to the reviser, the translator, we have had developments as well caused by neural networks, and everyone likes a nice headline like Google's voice generating artificial intelligence is now indistinguishable from humans. But in some cases, as you will see with examples, the quality is really quite impressive. So where have we come across speech recognition as well as text-to-speech before? Pretty much on all your smartphones, if you use virtual assistants, and there are a number of them, and some of us, even when needs must in a way, we use speech-to-speech translation apps, and these speech technologies, rather speech translation applications, and I've got a screenshot from English into Polish on the right-hand side. They integrate a chain of technologies. So they start by recognizing the speaker's input using automatic speech recognition. Then the text that has been recognized and transcribed is machine translated with or without English as a pivot, depends on the language pair that the users choose. It's machine translated into the target language, and then for some target languages, that translation, that raw translation, is synthesized using text-to-speech applications. And it works fairly well at times. Other times it's perhaps not that impressive, but again, it's work in progress, and it's useful technology if we know how to use it. And finally, in terms of data and examples from the profession, if we look at industry surveys like the Ellis surveys from 2020, but also more recently in 2022, we see that automatic speech recognition and also dictation and speech to text, which are essentially the same thing, but they're used in different workflows, get to have their own categories, and their use is not as wide as, let's say, computer-assisted translation or machine translation, but it's coming up. So we should be aware, and we should keep an eye on it. If anyone is interested on some thoughts from users in the industry on why they use such technologies, there are a couple of articles that detail and give you some quotes. But let's get to the practical part. So how can we actually use both dictation and speech synthesis in our work? There is a convenient way of using automatic speech recognition, and that's within Google Docs or even in Microsoft Office. And you can use this as a trainer or even as a professional. You can test your translation. You can test your site translation skills. Also, you can practice speaking. So there are a lot of practical applications and reasons why you should at least start experimenting. If you are a user of CAT tools, MadeCat has plugins for dictation. If you're a UN member, so if you're a translator for the United Nations or their organizations, Eluna also has this functionality. The format is very easy in a Google document, in Tools. There is the option for voice typing. There is a wide array of languages and locale-specific languages to choose from, and then you dictate as normal, and you speak as normally as possible for better disambiguation. So that's one possibility. If you want to use both dictation and synthesis, there are some differences, and now we get to the point where we see some CAT tools support such, let's say, enhancements of the interfaces, and others not so much. And I'll give you an example from MemoQ and Trados in a little bit. If you want better text-to-speech, then in that case, there is one plugin at the moment for one of the largest or the most widely known CAT tools available, Trados Studio. So there is a text-to-speech plugin, and we will see what it sounds like. And if you still want to use, but you're not, you're happy with some robotic voices or the recognition not being as up to scratch as with other tools, there are also built-in operating system tools for accessibility. There are separate screen readers that you can use. So there, we've gone a long way from the situation where there weren't technologies available. So that was used to be our excuse. Now we really don't have as many excuses not to try and not to see how we can benefit from these tools. So let me take a practical example. It's a little bit of a fake example, but roll with me. So let's say we have a Polish website from the European Central Bank, and we want to localize it into English, and we are interested in using these technologies. What could we do? Well, we could create a project with that web page in a CAT tool like MemoQ, and we could use a tool like Dragon Naturally Speaking, which I have mentioned, in order to dictate, but also to listen to our dictation. The next command is not for the people in the audience. It's just one of the commands that Dragon Naturally Speaking needs in order to start operating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dictate the translation of this first source segment into English, and using a bit of cheating from my translation memory. And then I'll also ask the tool to play back to me what I have just dictated. So I hope the sound comes through okay. So first of all, wake up. Our monetary policy statement at a glance, April, 2022. Go to sleep. So as you can see, dictation, this is using a tool called Dragon Naturally Speaking. Dictation in some languages is fairly accurate, and it's also, it doesn't require people to speak in a particular robotic manner. You just speak normally, but you do have to dictate punctuation. Let's hear now how such a tool is doing the text-to-speech, so the synthesis. Wake up. Read paragraph.
Our monetary policy statement at a glance, April 2022.
Go to sleep. So we've got an example of synthesis offered by one particular tool, so Dragon. And we can already notice that the voice is a little bit robotic, and also there isn't really much intonation. Prosody is a bit off. And this is one of the comments that sometimes we hear from our users in the industry. But let's see what other options are available, because we've mentioned quite a few. So let's move on to, for instance, Trados. And in Trados, again, we can create a project. And one of the things we can do in Trados, as well as in other tools, is that we can always export, if we want, a file for bilingual review in Trados, which means we can create 2 columns or several columns. We can create Word documents from the files we translate in a CAT tool in order to do some more processing in other applications like Microsoft Word. Why would we want to do that? Well, I'll give you an example. So for instance, if we are to create a bilingual review from a project in Trados, we can then open it in Word. And Word, let me move slightly this toolbar. So Microsoft Word in the review area, it has the read aloud function. So if you're using Microsoft 365 or Word 2016 or later, you also have this read aloud function. And what's interesting and useful about this use of Microsoft Word together with the CAT tools that I mentioned is that we can have the source.
Na gospodarkę korzystnie oddziałują też oszczędności zgromadzone przez społeczeństwo podczas pandemii i wsparcie rządowe.
As well as the
The
target.
economy is also benefited by the savings accumulated by society during the pandemic and government support.
So we can have both the source and the target in this environment. And finally, in terms of the demo, if we want to use a tool like Studio, for instance, we have special plugins which are they're created in order to allow us to access these text-to-speech features as well. So to demo that, let me go back and look for the text-to-speech plugin, which is here at the very top. And I'm not sure how well it's visible, probably not very visible, but let's just configure it to speak the source, because I'm guessing a majority of our participants are interested in the quality of the speech synthesis in Polish. So let's hear that. After a suitable pause.
Na gospodarkę korzystnie oddziałują też oszczędności zgromadzone przez społeczeństwo podczas pandemii i wsparcie rządowe.
And similarly for English, the voice will sound like this.
The economy is also benefited by the savings accumulated by society during the pandemic and government support.
So what we can see is that the prosody is better and the quality of the voices is also better. So in a minute and a half, let me also share with you, now that we know and we've seen practically where such technologies are available, how we can use them. So it's no longer a secret, it's not magic either. Why would you want to use it? The main reason we have discovered in our work is that using text-to-speech really enhances your attention. So given that translation, revision, post-editing, especially now neuro-machine translation, post-editing, are all very cognitively intensive tasks, expert tasks, we need every little help we can get in order to wake our attention up to the small, very minute, very fine details and little errors that sneak in. And inspired by our collaborators at the European Space Agency, we devised an experiment in Leeds a couple of years ago, or actually 3 years ago, where we looked at the impact of speech synthesis on revisers. And what we found was that the revisers who were accessing source sound, so they were also listening to the source segment while they were revising, were identifying and correcting significantly more accuracy errors. So omissions, mistranslations, those kinds of errors. Also, the feedback that we got from our users told us that the presence of speech also helped them make sure that the whole logic and the whole information of the source was in the target, which are extremely important elements. And also they picked up more subtle errors as well, which is always what we want. Does that apply only to revision? No, we're also finding similar benefits for post-editing machine translation. And in another study that we conducted together with Claudia Wiesinger and Justus Brockmann in our new HyTrans team, Alina Sekară and I have found that when it comes to post-editing with sound, even though the initial reaction, because it's such a new and novel way of working, might be one of resistance, we're finding that our post-editors are correcting more errors, and they're also becoming more productive when they use these technologies. But there is also a lot of variation, so we never promote a use of technology for everyone. And that's why I keep saying you must experiment as well. And finally, just to give you a bit more, I'm sorry for running through this, a bit more information from the same experiment. What we are finding is that in terms of over-annotating and under-annotating errors, which is a key issue in post-editing machine translation, over-corrections, under-corrections, we're finding that the presence of speech, of sound, is helping our participants to find out more errors and to correct them as well, even though they are also making more preferential corrections as well. And generally, as you would expect, a negative attitude towards technology translates into poor results when actually using the technology. So that's why we want to promote an attitude of open-mindedness, especially in our training programs. So there are lots of benefits that we are slowly discovering, and we want to continue this work. We believe that, as we've seen, text-to-speech, also dictation, are so available that there is no really any good reason for them not to become part of the translators, the post-editors, everyday toolkit. And we are going to also encourage our students to do that. And we also have received funding from Imminent to make more research, to set up other studies with professionals, and also to investigate the benefits for the quality of the target text, for its readability as well, not just for productivity. And overall, from my part, I really hope that everyone is encouraged to go and experiment a little bit and use these tools, and then come back and say whether they are helping, or if not, why are they not helping, so that we can together offer more useful suggestions for practicing translators. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ciobanu. No, do we? I think we will make a Q&A blog after the next presentation. So stay connected with us, or come back in half an hour.
Sure.
But I will see if the next speakers are waiting. Because I don't see them here. If they aren't there, then we can ask questions already now. Are there any questions to Professor Ciobanu regarding automatic speech recognition and automatic and machine translation? I must say I found it impressive what you presented, both the translation and ability or capability of machines to speak and to recognize speech. I have one little question. When talking about cellular phones, you said that some languages don't have to translate, don't have to use English as a pivot language. Which languages you meant?
And I meant that we have machine translation that for some language pairs is very highly resourced. So for instance, for the major language pairs that we would expect, the English, French, English, Spanish, English, German also. So we can build machine translation engines that go from one into the other. But for instance, for a lot smaller language pairs, so if I wanted to have a system from Romanian into, I don't know, Lithuanian, for instance, there wouldn't be as many millions of parallel sentences available so that we could build a direct engine from English into the target language. And that's why even e-translation, so the EU's translation engine, as far as I know, it will go first from Romanian into English and then from English into Lithuanian. So that's what I meant by English as a pivot. So depending on the language pair in which we are using these translation devices or even speech translation devices, we might have a direct engine or we might go through a pivot, even though it's not obvious to the user.
I'm asking because during my didactic activity, I noticed that observing errors that I don't have a protective sponge on the microphone. That's why I get some such blows. And I observed that most mistakes derived from the intermediary language, which I identified as English.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But as far as I know, in the German English, it automatically goes directly. But when you translate from Romanian into German, then it also uses English as a pivot.
Possibly. So I remember asking this question to the team, to the translation team. I think last year it was at one event, and they were saying that while they are gathering data as much as they can so that they could build direct engines at the moment for some language pairs, but they didn't actually give us a comprehensive list. The pivot method was still used. Of course, now in neural machine translation, we have
there is
25 languages. Sorry?
There was an interruption of speech transmission.
Sorry, I was saying that now we have multilingual engines being trained at the same time. We even have this zero-shot translation attempts. So even without any direct training data between language A and language B, we still use the neural networks to try and guess a translation. So there is a lot in terms of research that's going on, but as far as I'm aware, in production, we often have pivot languages trying to cope and provide the missing data. And to be honest, in the case of I'm gonna speak about Romanian mainly. So I'm noticing in Romanian English that machine translation also has a standardization effect, and we have source text which might not be so well formed, or it might use language that is not standard. So it belongs to a particular either domain or a group of users. And the translation into English standardizes it to a large extent, so that the translation then from English into the target language, I think it has a lot better chances of coming up with a useful solution than if it had gone directly.
Okay, thank you very much. I have noticed that the next speakers are waiting, so please stay connected, and we will come back to the discussion in half an hour.
With pleasure. Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon. Welcome to the TEW workshop. I'm sorry for these birds. I will. Our next two speakers are Aleksandra Drotew-Pastuszka and Joanna Sawa.
Yes, and I think Joanna Sawa is still waiting to be let into the meeting.
Okay. I will let you in presently.
She's here. Thank you.
I don't see her on the screen. Joanna Sawa, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, great. So you are both there, and I will read brief biographical notes of both of you. Aleksandra Drotew-Pastuszka is an experienced professional with over 10 years of experience within the translation and localization industry. She has always been passionate about languages and language services industry. She holds a master's degree in applied linguistics from the University of Warsaw, and from this place. After university, she went on to work in various positions at SDI Media, Canal Plus, and Lionbridge Poland. Now she is back at Lionbridge Poland as Multimedia Global Production Director, in addition to her role as event manager for Women in Localization Poland chapter. And Joanna Sawa is an energetic and solution-oriented manager with a passion for training and experience in the localization industry, a skilled specialist with excellent interpersonal skills and strong abilities in designing, conducting, and implementing educational programs. Previously in Lionbridge and TELUS, currently in IUNO, SDI Group. Did I pronounce it correctly? IUNO?
Yes. SDI IUNO Group, yes.
Yeah, IUNO SDI Group. So, ladies, the floor is yours, and I will be silent now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Once again, very nice to be here. So first of all, I will start our presentation. I will briefly tell you about women in localization in general, and then Ola will take over and tell you more. Okay, so first of all, Women in Localization, we are an NGO which was created in 2008, obviously to empower and support women in the business. It was started in US, as you can see, but now it has grown significantly, and we have many more chapters in many different countries. We will tell you a little bit more about that later. Yes, so as you can see, the idea was just to support women and foster a global community for the advancement of women and the localization industry. I think we can move to the next slide. Hola, sorry. Yes. So what are our values? So like I said before, the idea is to support each other, to create a global community of respect, support, empowerment, and commitment. Those are our values, which are very important to us, and I guess the majority of people, basically. Belonging, that's another one. Through our actions, programs, and ideas, we try to create, a network of women within localization business, to provide support, give tools, share knowledge, and in general just provide this supportive environment, which we believe helps women to grow and build careers in localization industry. So yeah, those are our board members, as you can see, from different areas and different countries. Thank you. We have many different programs which focus on different aspects of localization, and we try to cover different areas of expertise, let's say. And also it is in connection with our values, as you can see. So yes, and this is our advisory board this year. So as you can see, this is an organization for women, but we also are an inclusive organization. So men are also most welcome. So if you feel interested, just, let us know. Okay. This is the Polish Women in Localization chapter. So as you can see, Ola is our event manager. I'm the mentorship and education manager. We also have Romana, who shares the same position like I do. Aleksandra Brzeska is our chapter leader. Monika Skoneczna is our marketing manager. Urszula Węska, social media manager, and Karolina Ostaszewska, membership manager. So yes, and like I said earlier, it all started in 2008 in the US, but now we have many other chapters in many different locations. We are growing steadily, I would say. We have around 6,000 official members in 19 countries. So I think it's quite good. Of course, it wouldn't be all possible since we are an NGO. It wouldn't be possible without the support of our partners. And you can see some of them here in the slide. And our global sponsors as well, which you can also see here. Yes, so if you would like to join us, you can check us either on Facebook or LinkedIn or via our page. I strongly advise, if you feel that there is still some area in localization which you would like to, discover more, or just meet new people, new women who, could provide mentorship or just share some pro tips, I think our organization is a very good place to start. So strongly advise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Ola,
very much,
over to
Asia.
you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having us here today. The topic of today's meeting is multimedia localization. And to be honest, I had a huge problem with thinking about a more precise title, because this is such a broad area. This is such a broad part of our business. So I think that this slide shows how broad it really is. So I put down all those terms that came to my mind while thinking about multimedia localization, and I will briefly explain why. So first of all, what is multimedia? And for me, multimedia is content. It's a content that goes beyond text and print. It's a combination of different forms like images, audio, content, interactive content, video, animation, and text. So you may also ask where we can find multimedia. And again, I would say multimedia is everywhere. So again, a very short sentence, but I think it explains it all. Why multimedia is everywhere? It's because whether you're at a railway station looking at the schedule screens, or you're watching your television or using your mobile, multimedia is there. And multimedia has changed everything from manufacturing to the advertising and education, from education to healthcare. So it is really everywhere, and it can also be anything, because multimedia is anything which you watch, listen in a form of text, photograph, audio, video, and much, much more. To add, everyday multimedia companies produce materials for different industries. This can be instructional videos, this can be training videos, corporate videos, online presentations, flash-based presentations, marketing, product or sales materials. So this list is could be much, much longer, believe me. And so we know what multimedia is, but what is multimedia localization? And multimedia localization, to put it briefly, is a process. It's a process of taking content and modifying it to fit the context, needs, social norms, cultural differences of the target audience simply. So, yes. So I would also like to, perhaps it's not that easy to put in one sentence, but I would also like to make the statement that audio visual translation is not multimedia localization. It's, I would say that it would be rather, it wouldn't be it wouldn't be okay to just say that it's exactly the same thing. And I'm sure that you're all aware of audiovisual translation and the definition. It's a widespread term in academia and translation studies. However, multimedia localization or media localization is rather more commonly used in industry circles since it goes much beyond translation. So I would say that audiovisual translation is actually one of the many processes within multimedia localization. Yes, and why we should actually localize content, multimedia content. As you can see, it's these are just some numbers out of many studies, out of many research that is being done every year. And just to show you, just to make you realize that the 88% of people who say that video persuaded them to buy a product or service. 81% of marketers say that video helped them increase their sales. 73% of people say they would rather watch a video than read an article. So I could give you much more numbers that would really show why multimedia content should be localized. But I think it's pretty obvious. We are surrounded by multimedia, and also it's shown in the number of services. And here I'm just showing you a few of them. I would say, looking at my experience, most popular ones, but the list is definitely not complete here. But just to name a few, we've got transcription, under which we can have plain transcription, speech-to-text transcription, or post-edited speech-to-text transcription. We can have subtitling, and there we've got closed captions, open captions, SDH subtitles. Audio production, that is also a very broad term, because there can be dubbing, human voiceover, text-to-speech voiceover, there can be audio description. And also, just to name a few media services like audio integration, UI screenshotting, screen recording, on-screen text localization, and a big service that is really growing rapidly, especially after pandemic. And we all know, remember those 2 years, and I think that the number of e-learning courses we all took increased quite rapidly in those 2 years. So e-learning course localization, and I think this is a very interesting service, because it actually, e-learning courses, they can include all the previously mentioned services. So we will touch briefly, on e-learning workflow, localization workflow. So you will see how complex such a process can be. We can move on. If you got used to my colorful slides, here it is. And who's involved in multimedia localization? I think that we would all say, of course, translators or subtitlers, multimedia specialists. But that process is actually, sorry, I moved too fast. It's a team play, and the team is quite impressive, I would say. Because multimedia localization, it's a process that has to be managed. So we need project manager, or even a project management team. Depends on how big the client is. It depends on how many projects we have, how complex they are. Usually there is, of course, there are multimedia specialists, e-learning specialists, there are DTP specialists, engineers. Before, however, we even start producing, we've got sales representatives, we've got solution architects. Of course, there is the client. So you can see that there are so many different people taking part in this process. And in my opinion, multimedia localization is, or at least should be, a harmony of many moving parts. And by parts, I mean teams, people who take part in this process. And as I mentioned before, e-learning course localization can be complex and can be tricky, because as you can see, we can have, at the very beginning of this process, we've got development of source codes, which is done by content creation teams. Of course, it's not always like that. What I mean by that is that quite frequently we receive courses that were already built by the client, by internal teams, or with another vendor. But we do also create content for our clients. So the team works very closely with our clients and creates the product that meets their needs and requirements. And this itself is a very, I can show you briefly, really briefly, because we could talk about content creation for hours, but very briefly, you can see that the the development of source course is a huge process itself, but that contains pre-production, production, post-production, and delivery steps. But coming back to e-learning course localization, if we have the source course either provided by the client or produced by us together with the client, then the course needs to go to the next stage. And usually these are our e-learning specialists who take the course and do the prep or pre-process the course. So what I mean by that is that the course needs to be looked at as a combination of different elements. So those elements need to be extracted by the e-learning experts and provided to different teams who then work on those elements and prepare them, for example, for translation. So if there is an image and, for example, an on-screen text that requires translation, first it needs to be extracted and converted into a format that is translation ready. Same needs to happen, for example, with audio script. So it also needs to be extracted. So e-learning specialists in the pre-production stage needs to make sure that every element of the e-learning course that requires localization is extracted and is ready to be shared with the next team who's next in the process. And then we have the language process. So translation and review of OSTs, so on-screen text, audio script, image script, video script, if there are, of course, all those elements, because we've got different courses. So this, of course, all those processes and different teams constantly need to be managed. So, of course, there is a project manager or project management team that keeps an eye on all the aspects of this process of localization and make sure that it goes smoothly from one milestone to the other. So now we've got translation step and review, for example, if it's included in the process. And then usually what happens is the client review or client sign-off. So course and the whole course, every element is usually checked by the client and signed off, or rather, I would say it happens that the course is signed off right away, but usually what happens maybe even more frequently is the feedback. The client is sending us feedback. So the next step actually is helping, is implementing the feedback and making sure that the changes the client requested are implemented to the translation. And also, after the content is signed by the client, the translated content, we can start recording the audio. Whether it's usually for e-learning, I would say it's voiceover. I must say I haven't seen any dubbing yet in e-learning courses, but we then need to work with the VO Studio, with VO Talents, and record the audio script. Sometimes there is another step in this process, which is, for example, pronunciation guide creation. So there might be, as you can see, different variations of each single step in the process, because there are different clients, different requirements, and simply someone might need a review, a second round of review, a pronunciation guide, but there might be clients who are not including these elements in the process. So recording starts, it still needs to be, of course, managed. There needs to be a good communication between all the parties taking care of the whole process. We've got audio proofing, and when the audio is ready, recorded, all the translated files are there, reviewed, signed off with all the changes suggested by the client implemented. We can move on to the integration step or the post-production step, which means that e-learning specialist takes all those elements, localized elements, and integrates them back into one course. There might be, of course, also subtitling. There might be the OSTs, as I mentioned, different elements that differ from course to course. And e-learning specialist must make sure that the course is, that the localized course is actually giving the same feeling, is looking exactly in the same way as the source content, as the source e-learning course. Usually after integration, there is, it again varies. Now we can have another round of review, client review, or sometimes even a review done by a different language services provider. And perhaps even one more stage of feedback implementation that needs to again end with the next round of integration. So, but let's say there was only one step of the review, feedback was implemented, course was, all the elements of the course were integrated, and we can move on to testing, which is a very important part of the process and is also done at least it's also done by another team that is being managed by project manager. This step is can be functional build review done by a tester or linguistic review. So we have two aspects of testing, and both are very both are crucial, I would say, because you may have a course that is really well translated, that linguistically is looking really amazing. However, the functional side of the course may, if it's not looking well, the whole experience of the target audience may be destroyed. So both, I would say, are crucial. And as I mentioned, those steps need to be managed. So we've got the project management team. And what I think is crucial, not only for the team working on the course production, localization, but also for the client, for the time that they spend on the course localization, for the budget, and for the target audience that they want to reach. It's the initial steps are the most important ones, because if we get a proper brief, if we manage to get a good feel of clients' expectations, if we offer a good process, then the whole localization process runs smoothly. I told you that integration and so the post process may happen not only once, and that's one of the moments where costs can go high, when time can extend quite drastically if we don't consider all the aspects of localization. So if we don't get the right requirements at the beginning, or if we miss any of the steps in the process that was, for example, at the very beginning not defined, we might end up with a client review and the client who says that there are so many elements missing, or, for example, a lot of terms were not translated. or were translated and they were supposed to stay in English. So this would mean that we have to take the feedback, go back, for example, to our translators, then take those translated elements, maybe even re-record the audio, because we might have done voiceover, and the script was also checked by the client, and there were some issues mentioned by the client in the script. So re-recording, translation, re-recording, another round, for example, of subtitler as well. And all those elements that are checked and corrected need to go again to the e-learning specialist who's doing another round of integration. And of course, something might happen while the integration is being done. So it would be good for the testers to also have another look at the final product. So you might imagine how complex, how long and costly e-learning course localization can become if it's not well prepared at the very beginning of the project. Yes, and just to sum up, because we've got like 2 minutes, once again, why multimedia localization is important, just to name a few reasons. It gives companies extended videos reach. More than 92% of people watch videos on mute. Did you know that? And that's why it's also important to always think about your target audience, how they consume multimedia, what they prefer, what would be the best way to get their attention. Would it be voiceover? Would it be only subtitles? That's all to figure out at the very beginning of the whole process. Another thing is the increased video content's accessibility. As you can see, more than 2% of people around the world have moderate to severe hearing loss. And it is an estimated 270 million people in the Americas have experienced hearing loss. So this number is expected to grow to 322 million by 2050. So a 48% increase. So you might imagine the audience that is there and can be reached thanks to different localization services. Also, another advantage is the immersive and more authentic content experience, improvement of content ROI, and going global simply. And it's 2:30, so thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully we'll have another chance to go into more details, perhaps of one of those services that I mentioned, or some of the processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well, both of you, Joanna and Alexandra. Let's start the Q&A session. I'll check if our two other speakers are there. Okay, thank you, Karina. And unfortunately, you won't see the persons asking the questions for technical reasons. Yeah, are there any questions to any of our speakers? We have 4 speakers altogether. Yeah. Dr. Miguel Bernal Merino, Dr. Dragos Ciobanu, and Alexandra Piotrów-Pastuszka and Joanna Sawa. Are there any comments or? Oh, okay.
Yes, so I have a question to Professor Ciobanu, because you said that it is more effective to find the errors in the translation when you use text to speech. But I wanted to ask because I think it might be more time consuming. So I wanted to ask whether this ratio of error to time consumption is like effective during the course of work. I don't know if you understand my question.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for the question. So in our revision experiment, so the first one where we tested the text-to-speech, we had the same time limit for all our participants. They were working on approximately 300 words that they were revising from French into English. And we didn't notice any difference in the productivity, so it didn't slow them down. The only significant difference that we noticed was that because we were also using an eye tracker, we saw that the mean fixation duration on the source diminished, but not massively, but it diminished a little bit. So the participants were looking a little bit less at the source because they were hearing it, but otherwise they weren't particularly slowed down. At least our data doesn't show that they were slowed down by listening. And then further in the post-editing experiment, because we couldn't get the participants in the lab, so we did this online and they were in front of their cameras. For this, we had a strict time limit, but we saw a lot of variation in the amount of text that they post-edited. So that was the participant variation that I mentioned. But again, overall, as a group, their productivity increased. Now, whether this is also because they were getting more familiar with the task, that's a possibility. So I'm not saying that text-to-speech is the best thing since sliced bread, but the fact that we also got feedback in saying listening made me pick up more subtle errors. Sometimes we all know that we don't actually read every single character, every single word. We skip around, and some of the errors that are present in both revised text, but also in neuro machine translated text, are very subtle. So a preposition that is different, or an ending, or even a name of a person that's changed, or an initial. So these kinds of errors are very easy to skip over. So if, at least in my opinion, if we find a way to heighten our attention so that we can pick those up without actually dropping our productivity, I think that's worth exploring. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions to our other speakers? I'm really sorry for these problems.
Okay, so let's show up this. So I have a question to the final speaker. So to the ladies. So could you maybe give any examples of so to say challenges which were specifically interesting when it comes to localizing those courses, and so something which you have come across and so to say you found specifically so to say challenging?
Thank you very much for the question. I would say there are challenges of different nature. One that I see most frequently, I would say, is time. And I see it now when it comes to e-learning courses. I've seen it when I worked with dubbing and subtitling for a TV series, for the cinema. I remember, we did some projects, dubbing projects, and we had a few months for a project, let's say a movie. But after a few years, this time decreased to first to 2 months, then to a month. And the same keeps happening with other services. So e-learning courses are not different. especially in today's world, where they became much more popular, and the demand is bigger and is still growing. So I would say one of the challenges is time. The other one I would say is multimedia in general, and the knowledge about multimedia localization. So we have not too much time for the localization itself, but at the beginning we spent quite a lot of time on discussion with the client about the workflow, about possibilities, about different steps of the process, because we need to also explain why some of the steps are needed, why we will benefit from including them in the process afterwards. As I mentioned, for example, English terms that were translated but were not supposed to. So I would say lack of do not translate terms list, right? Or issues with pronunciations during a VO recording. I would say maybe we should have done the pronunciation guide. So e-learning are very complex, as I mentioned, because they can include all those services. And believe me or not, we've got projects that are VO recording only, projects that are subtitles creation only. And the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges of e-learning is that they can contain them all. So you need to look at those different aspects, be able to explain them, be the expert, plus explain why you need sometimes more time and more, maybe not more budget, but more time in order not to increase the budget afterwards. Oh, and maybe the last challenge, or I would say adventure, is technology. How we can be faster with the use of technology. So that's why I think localization is so interesting and will be interesting during the upcoming years.
I'm satisfied with the answer. Okay, thank you. Any other question? Sorry.
Hello. So I have a question to Professor Bernard Marino, and I wanted to ask you because the localization from a simple translation became, this whole process that was included in the development of the games, and so many other processes were then added, testing, accessibility, etc. And I want to ask if you perhaps have any ideas what the next step for localization is.
The next step for localization of video games. The next step, I think, is what has been happening, but only on the biggest, most experienced companies. So a lot of companies that are smaller or less experienced are playing catch up. Typically, the reason why I show all those processes and workflows through the time, it's to say that it is normal that they started what they started and they made the errors they made, and they're still making those errors. But those that are more experienced are not making those errors. You would have seen the same in any other industry. So you can see the translation of cinema, the translation of literature, the translation of comics, the translation. And the beauty of it is that they finally realize that they just need to put the time, they need to put the money, they need to put the planning, they need to internationalize the software in order to localize the software. And if they're going into 25 different locales, they need to think of the locales. It sounds very obvious, but it's just very difficult to plan. It's very difficult to manage. It's very difficult to find the professionals in each of those locales that can deliver on all those requirements, because the industries may not exist in those countries. So it's a big challenge, right? I mean, I would always criticize companies, but it is reasonable that they make these mistakes. Now, the next big step is that everybody learns to do the products at the AAA level. So every game out there would be just as good as the localization of The Witcher, or the localization of The Last of Us, or the localization of Final Fantasy, not only into English, but Final Fantasy into all the other languages. That's the next step, that everybody needs to be on board with that. And that, from the point of view of language and translation, what that means is, okay, so we're going to identify what is unique about the language of this game, the stylistic, the expression, the nuances, the neologism, the idiosyncrasies, and how those could be reinvented in each of these languages so that the players in those countries can enjoy them without knowing Japan, or without knowing America, without knowing Canada, without knowing Poland, because why should they? And that is the process that's being integrated. So by having a workflow that integrates translation inside the development, pretty much is not in pre-production, but at least in production, localization is already being thought about and done. Actually, it's being translated. So some things are being written, and a month later it's being translated already, and the game has not been finished. This needs to happen, because otherwise they cannot hit the simultaneous shipment worldwide. And that's what they need to do in order to get the money. Otherwise, the video games go into piracy, and then they lose the money. So enabling that process there, that means that translators, ideally, are given more information that is directly relevant to the game. And translating a game is maybe less fun than you may think, because you do not see the game, because when you are translating, the game is not available for you to play. And even if it were, they wouldn't give it to you unless you're in-house. And even when you're in-house, you still have problems. So the fact is that they just create all these other tasks. There's a translator, there's a reviewer, there's a style editor, there's a creativity editor or officer. And they all take care that whatever is unique about that IP, the intellectual property, is going to be maintained and relatable in all the languages. So I think that the next stage is that everybody gets up to the plate and actually improves their performance, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any comments?
I've got a question for my co-panelists, if there are no other questions. So I'm happy to hold.
I don't see any hands raised. So please answer.
Okay. So we like to think about and talk about collaboration, and whenever we go somewhere, an industry event, there's a lot about collaboration. But at the same time, there is this perception that the role of or the job, the working conditions of a freelancer are fairly isolated. How, in your experiences, how willing are the LSPs, anyone else involved in the workflow, to have people genuinely collaborate, not just as a waterfall? I do the translation, someone else does the revision, and then it gets back to me as track changes, but more, more integrated, because we do have the technology, and there's no reason why people can't talk to each other and work on the text. What's your experience and maybe your views?
Better not to talk to yourself. So that's my favorite answer. It depends. I would say that I've seen much more collaboration in dubbing projects, for example. So that was really a teamwork. Everybody even coming to the studio, discussing, sharing knowledge materials. Yeah, that was really amazing. But that is also, you know, possible for companies that, for example, have their studios, their teams, you know, in one place, right? That's much easier. Of course, in today's world, we can do almost everything online. So people also join via different channels. Now, I would say with a bit different multimedia, like e-learning courses, like all those, you know, online presentations, materials, I would say that there is less collaboration. It's more of sharing materials, sharing information, and I would say that the biggest challenge is time. You know, how to do it so quickly as our clients demand it, and still have time for good collaboration, in the sense of, you know, not only have the process standardized, well managed, and be sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to know, received all the material, reference materials, and so on, but also be able to sometimes discuss together, think about ideas. And I think it depends on many things, like product, budget, time. So a lot of different aspects, I think. So that's why I said it depends.
Thank you.
Yeah, in my experience, so obviously they don't collaborate with people outside companies. Game companies are very paranoid about copyright, IP, and you have all these non-disclosure agreements before you anything, which is fair enough. But I know that within their teams, just because I interact with them, they so they may have a language lead and different translators working on that version. But then because they need accountability and they have milestones, they need to check timely progression, etc., they will have maybe weekly meetings. The language lead will establish what is the specific IP terminology, nomenclature for items, weapons, characters, whatever, geography, toponyms. And then the different translators would work with that. Sometimes the translators in the team in-house are typically actually not translating. They are just editor and correctors, because the actual translators are freelancers working at home. And the freelancers may get a glossary or a memory tool or whatever, but they don't get the benefit of all the information that they would need. So they just keep adding new tasks and new professionals doing something different. But that's the typical thing of yeah. So the collaboration is there, but not in the way you mean, I don't think.
Yeah, and if I may add, it also depends on from the client, because I had clients who were very relational, let's say, and they wanted to come to us, they wanted to spend this time in the studio, for example. They wanted to discuss, they wanted to meet with the translator, the creative people wanted to have, you know, this relationship and those discussions. But right now, my team, for example, is working in a queue. So time, you know, the requirement of being fast and delivering fast means we're finding new solutions. So like, for example, queue-based environment of work. So we've got a queue, And for example, project manager who's now free takes the first project from the queue and works on it. And the same happens with our production teams. So when the more automation, the more of such solutions, the less the old good collaboration, I would say, which doesn't mean there is no collaboration, it's just different.
Thank you. No, it's interesting how you were both saying that, it depends, but we're seeing the chain getting longer with new services and new checkpoints introduced. And this is an experience related to the question we had about if we listen to the source now or the target or whatever, doesn't this make the whole process longer? I'll tell you, we did something else to make the process longer. So we asked the students in our post-editing project to also annotate errors. So, in theory, people will go like, oh, this is madness. You're just slowing everyone down. But this task, we found that actually it gave them a lot more reassurance than telling them post-edit to these specs, because the time-consuming, but we're talking seconds. So the act of highlighting an error, deciding this is an error, this is what label it is, actually gives the linguist the reassurance that they are doing a justified job. So, sometimes I think we need to be a bit careful about stripping everything and very, turning this into, I don't know, the Ford assembly line where one person does only one little job, because sometimes several jobs might actually lead to better results from one person than just dividing it.
It all depends on the task, whether it's a repeatable one, whether it's more creative. So I told you it's my favorite answer.
like a true linguist.
But I completely agree with errors, and it's not only important for linguists, it's also important for LSPs, for our clients, and our discussions. So if I have a record of errors that, for example, linguists found, and I have them categorized, and I know what's preferential, what's not, what's grammatic, what's perhaps a DTP error, then it's much easier for me also to discuss with the client, to have this discussion on what really needs to be implemented, what is just preference. Of course, preference can also be implemented,
sure.
But we need to have this discussion. And it also helps me to get better, because I see whether the client who's coming and saying, there are so many errors, please take care of your DTP team, is so, I can look at the reports and I'm like, okay, but DTP is like 5% of all those errors, right? So it gives me data, and data that helps me get better, but also make good decisions.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, my colleague has a question. Can you? Sorry, can you?
We can still hear you, but probably from the old mic.
Yeah, let's use the old channel in spite of. Can you hear me now? Okay. I listened enchanted to your professional talk, to the exchange of opinions and experiences. I would like to simply thank both the speakers from various locales, from London and from Vienna, and of course also from Warsaw, I guess. And also a big many thanks to the audience. And I think we will now move on to the break here, and to all our speakers, I wish a bright afternoon and a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you, and bon appetit.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
a lovely
very much.
day.
Thank you.
Bye
Take care.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.